Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Vanilla Minecraft. And getting right to it, today we're going to begin the process of renovating the surface of my island. Now, this is going to be a huge undertaking, and we're not going to make much progress today because overall it's probably going to take hundreds upon hundreds of hours in order to get to the point where I really want it to be. But what we can do today is get a bit of an overview on what some of those changes are going to be. That way I can get some feedback from you guys, and as we take on these individual projects in future episodes, we'll be able to kind of have a better idea of where we're going with them, and I'll have some more kind of ideas to work with. So, the first thing that we want to work with today is the trees. Now, the trees on my island are, for the most part, just jungle trees. The only real thing that I did to them after I grew them was I roughed the leaves up a little bit, just so they would look a little bit more interesting and not so flat like they do naturally. And that's pretty much all I did. I left them as they were. And that's okay. There's two main issues, though. One is that a lot of the trees, especially ones like this one here, and this is partially due to fire damage, I notice, something we're going to struggle with a lot as I start redoing these more. But one of the problems is that the leaves, well, they're kind of lacking. There's just not enough of them on the top of a lot of these trees. It just feels like a little ball of leaves dropped on top of a big pole. So that's not quite going to cut it. We're going to want to expand those out a little bit, and maybe even in the future, on a separate kind of pass on these trees, maybe we'll add like a proper big canopy to a lot of them, because that'll feel really epic. But for right now, for the sake of my sanity, I think we're going to stick with just making kind of a slightly bigger area than this. Like, I think this tree over here actually looks pretty good as it is. So, kind of a leaf canopy like this across all of them. We don't want stuff like this where it feels like just a little ball of leaves at the top. And we also want to redo the trunks. Now, there's nothing specifically wrong with the trunks how they are. Trees do tend to grow perfectly straight up like that. But here in Minecraft, where we don't really have any extra detail on the trunk, that's not quite good enough. So what we're going to have to do is add a little bit of shape to it. We don't want to go overboard, but taking a few blocks out here and there, maybe adding a few in different areas, building up the branches to these sections so that they look a little bit more connected, stuff like that is going to help these feel much more natural and much more kind of interesting to look at, rather than just feeling like a 2x2 pillar of wood with some leaves on top of it. So, I'm going to get to work on this one tree right here, and we'll see what it looks like at the end, and then maybe we'll do a couple more and just try and get a good idea of what the island will look like, and maybe we'll figure out some of the details and how we want the trees to work out. So, obviously, I went ahead and just did 2 extra trees while I was at it, and overall, I think they're okay. I could still use a little touching up, I think, but you get the idea. Turns out it's pretty difficult to get a lot of detail out of a 2x2 trunk, but I think they look okay, and certainly a lot better than the straight-up pillars that we were left with before. In fact, let's get a little aerial view of these. Swoosh! Yeah, I feel like you can definitely see the difference of those versus the rest of the island. So, that's nice. I think that'll do. Can we get up here? Yes. So, I think they're okay. We'll see how it looks. We'll see how our style kind of modifies as we do the rest of these. Boy, is there a lot of them. But I think for right now, we should move on to something a little bit different. Ow. And that is redoing some of the flora here on my island. At least kind of figuring out the style in which we're going to do that. So, the grass here on my island is the first real problem. looking around, there's just not a lot of it. It almost feels closer to a tropical resort than it does some unkempt, wild, untamed island, which is more the style I want to go for. And I think a big part of that is just not having enough tall grass. So we're going to try and plant a lot more of this stuff around, probably at least 3 times as much as we currently have, if not quite a bit more than that. And that should help make things look a little more wild and a little more untamed. After that, I also want to modify our flower situation a bit. So, for the longest time in Minecraft, there were only 2 real flowers. That was the dandelion and the rose. Or, well, now it's the poppy. But, those served us well. But then in Minecraft 1.7, they added all kinds of new flowers. The azure bluettes, the alliums, the 4 different kinds of tulips, the peonies and lilacs and rose bushes and sunflowers, all kinds of them. And I went a little bit crazy with those. Pardon me as I take a little snooze. I went a little bit crazy with those, and I splattered them all over the island, for the most part. Just kind of spammed them everywhere. And honestly, that was pretty dang lazy of me. It's a very, very lazy way to try and add color and interest to a build, and I honestly don't think it's going to cut it. So what I think we should do instead is focus on a couple very specific kinds of flowers just throughout my island, and maybe place a couple more in very specific situations. So what I mean by that is maybe we'll have like dandelions and azure bluettes across my entire island, just kind of sparsely, you know, wherever. And I think those 2 are actually a good choice for that. Those 2 feel more natural than a lot of the other flowers do, at least to me. And then maybe in a couple spots, we'll have very specific flowers. For example, the blue orchids. If you look down, you might see a couple tiny little blue pixels down there. Those are blue orchids, and here on my island, I've placed those only next to water sources, because naturally they only spawn in swampy areas. So I thought that made sense, and I still really like that idea. So I want to do that with maybe a couple other types of flowers as well, make them grow in just very specific spots. Like, for example, sunflowers. Maybe we have one spot somewhere on the island that just has a small group of sunflowers, kind of like a little mini sunflower plains biome, and I think that's a lot better than just kind of spamming them wherever I feel like on the island. So that's what I want to do with flowers, and then after that, I think we should work on some saplings. I think having some saplings around on the ground will help kind of make the ground look a little more interesting as well. And I think that jungle and dark oak saplings are going to be the best for that. Jungle obviously matches the trees that we have around pretty well, though we are unfortunately going to need to put a piece of string on top to prevent it from growing, but I don't think that's too big. Excuse me, sir. I don't think that's too much of an issue. I think that'll look okay. And we also can get away with using dark oak saplings, I think, because those honestly look pretty similar to a lot of the trees we have as well. And those actually have the benefit of not growing as a single sapling either, so that's kind of nice. I think that having those around will help the diversity of the surface as well. And then one last thing that I want to try and do up here, just in terms of default Minecraft plant life and stuff like that, is add some mushrooms onto the bottom of our trees. I think that'll help make them look a little bit more interesting. So, obviously I don't have those on me, because I am ill-prepared. But yeah, something just like this, and like that. Just little mushrooms on there. I think it'll be a nice little extra bit of detail. Now, there is one problem with this concept, though, and that's that these mushrooms will spread. And eventually, they can kind of cover an area fairly well, at least more so than I want them to. So I think that in order to solve that problem, we're going to need to hide a few mushrooms inside the base of these trees. I'm going to need to replace that block. So if we place a couple mushrooms in here, like a so, and then we go like this, now these mushrooms will no longer spread. Basically what'll happen is they'll try to spread, and then they'll check in a 9 by 9 by 3 area, and if there's more than 5 mushrooms, or actually if there's only 5 mushrooms or more in the area, they will actually fail to spread. So from now on, these 3 mushrooms are the only ones that will spawn around this tree. And I think that's a nice little detail. I want to try and do that around the base of all of our trees, at least the ones that we have done. So that should be cool as well. Now, I want to test all of this stuff out, these 4 concepts that I just went over with you guys. But I think we're going to try it just in a small area at first. And I think we'll do it right up here in between these 3 trees that I decorated, just to get a good idea of what it's going to look like in the end. So I'm going to get to that, and I'll be back with you guys in just a minute. So here's what all of that looks like in practice, at least in kind of a rough form. I'm still trying to find the perfect balance between flowers and tall grass and double tall grass and ferns and all of this stuff. But at least as a rough pass, this should give you an idea of what it all looks like together. At least it'll give you an idea of what the most bland and undetailed parts of my island will look like. So from here, we can start adding extra stuff. We can start building more things on the surface of the island to help break up the terrain a bit and prevent this from feeling like one giant kind of grassy plains area. Now, probably the most obvious thing we can do is add more trees. Now, we don't want any more of these giant jungle trees that we have. I think we have a good quantity of those already. But if we custom build some slightly smaller trees of varying styles, I think that that'll help the diversity here on the island a lot and make things look a lot better, especially if we have several completely unique styles, though we don't want to go too crazy with it. That being said, I'm not going to work on that yet today because, well, I want to try and experiment with some different tree styles before I start adding them here to the island. So we'll do that in the future, but for right now, we can experiment with some simpler things. So the first example of that, and one of the other kind of obvious examples for adding detail to the surface of the island, would be throwing in bushes. So let's actually pop one of those in here. Now, they don't need to be anything special or unique or interesting. Just a simple little bush will do. Maybe something like a so. Don't really like the shape that I went with, but maybe that's okay. It's just a temporary bush anyway. We'll likely end up redoing this when we redo the terrain, because these cliffs are going to be modified quite a lot in the near future. But, you know, let's see. Maybe something like that, just to give it a little more variety. Good enough. You get the idea. Just simple bushes like this here and there. Though we do need to be careful when we add these in, because if we do too many of them, it's going to start feeling like a vanilla jungle biome again, and we really don't want that either. We don't want the ground to feel super cluttered, we just don't want it to feel plain either. We want a kind of a nice in-between. So the bushes will help with that, especially near the cliff edges and stuff like this, where we can kind of, you know, drip the leaves down a bit and make them kind of wrap down the cave walls. Or cave? This is the most open cave I've ever seen. The cliff walls is what I meant to say. So that'll be nice. Obviously, this bush is a little ugly, but, you know, it's what you get when you do temporary bushes. What else we can do, though, is stones. Have, you know, some boulders or natural rock poking out from the surface of the island. Now, we're going to have quite a few of these, or quite a bit of stone, I should say, kind of sticking out from the island once I start redoing the terrain, because we're going to end up with a lot more kind of steep faces and stuff like that with stone showing through. But we can also try and work in some bigger boulders and stuff like that. Let's try and work out a little something here. Again, this is just going to be kind of temporary as a bit of an example. It's a little bit more elongated than I was after. Maybe like that. And then we could potentially shape it a little. Though, an issue that we're going to run into with stuff like this and adding shape to things like this, I think that's almost okay. Almost. An issue that we're going to run into with these is that we don't have anything that can really shape them very well. The only real stone variant that works for that is cobblestone, and it's okay, but at the same time, using cobblestone, it kind of feels like just a pile of rubble sitting on top of the stone. And using that to shape it just doesn't feel quite right. But, I don't know, maybe we'll experiment with that a little bit. Maybe if we work it in a little bit better, it'll look better. But it's kind of hard to say. Right now, though, I think that we'll probably steer away from that and instead just use the cobble to work on the shape down at the base level. I think that that should work out a little bit better, because then it's more like little pieces have kind of fallen off over time. Maybe we can, let's see, do I have mossy? Yes, I do. Maybe we can put a little bit of mossy in the ground, stuff like that. I think that helps the situation quite a bit. Yeah, something like that I think is okay. It's a little unfortunate that we don't have something like, say, andesite slabs and stairs. Mojang. I really can't believe that we still don't have those, but it would make stuff like this amazingly easy because we'd be able to, blend these shapes together a little more, and it would still look like one big kind of cohesive piece rather than a bunch of little ones like it does if we use the cobble. But this is kind of what I was referring to, kind of the idea, just having little bits of stone like this. Again, that doesn't look very good, but it'll look better once I spend some time on them. You get the idea. Other things that we can do, though, and I know I'm rushing through these concepts. I want to try and get them all out to you guys. Let's head somewhere a little different, just so we're not confining all of this to one tiny little area. Woo! Let's head over here a little ways. And let's see. Yeah, this will work. Let's try and build a little bit of a melon patch. I think that that'll be another good example of something we can do. Oh, I didn't even use, concrete powder. I wanted to try that with the stone. That's okay. We'll try it later on when we're working on those a bit more. But let me grab my melon farm supplies here. So, if you guys have ever been to a area that grows watermelons, and they do grow naturally, by the way. I looked this up. Apparently melons, some sibling to the watermelon at least, grows naturally in southern Africa, which I found interesting. I have no idea how they look when they're growing naturally, but if you've ever been to a field where people are intentionally growing watermelons, basically they have the melons just out kind of on the ground, and the vines that the melons are growing off of are super duper leafy. So you end up with situations like this, where they're just kind of encased in leaves and stuff like that. And it actually looks pretty cool, like to have just these melons out in a field and all of these leaves and stuff kind of pouring around them. And I think that we can make that work in a couple spots here on the island. Now, we don't need to go too overboard with this. We'll just do a little one here. But I think that this could be really cool, having a couple spots like this that have something like a melon patch. Let's see, do I have any bone meal? I must have some somewhere. I'm almost positive. I don't. I totally don't. Well, pretend that these are full grown and attaching to the melons. So, yeah, I think that things like this could look really cool. Leaves, jungle leaves. There we go. So, things like this. This is what will kind of stand out as you're wandering around the surface of the island. We're going to have some structures yet. Don't worry. I know that some of you have asked for things like that. We are actually going to be building some structure on the surface that'll make things look way cooler as well. But I think some natural stuff like this, that as you're walking around, you just see just little things that stand out like this, it's going to help the surface come alive. It's going to help it look much more interesting than just being some grass. So this'll do for our first little melon patch. I'm probably going to move it and do something more interesting with it later on, but you get the idea. So it's stuff like this that I'm after. So if you have any ideas for kind of things that break up the terrain that we can make that are natural and will fit in with the theme of the island, but not be too intrusive, I'd love to hear your ideas, because I have a few more, but you guys always have more than I do. So that's that. That's some of the stuff that'll detail the island. Again, I know I'm rushing, but we have two more big projects that I want to finish yet today, and those are right over here. And I wanted to save a bit of time so that I could show these to you guys properly. So these are the two things on my island that I kind of threw in and just left. Like two interesting terrain features. One is our beach, which is very bland and kind of weird. Like, I don't know why the sand goes all the way up there. I feel like that should be grass. But we're going to try and renovate this, maybe grow a couple palm trees while we're here, do a little bit of intensive landscaping, and try and make things a little better. Maybe work out this transition. But before we do that, I want to work on this area. So this little natural pond here is okay. It was here when the island generated. I added in this waterfall, as you can tell, because it looks absolutely atrocious. I don't know why I made it so bulky. But we're going to solve that. We're going to try and make this look a little bit better. Let's get an aerial view, shall we? We're going to try and make this pond look a little better. redo this waterfall so it's a bit more attractive, maybe liven the area up a bit, and yeah, we'll see how it turns out. Now, before I get to that, I have to gather some supplies, because my inventory's been full for a while now. But I'll be back with you guys once we're ready to start on this project. Okay, I'm back, it's raining, and unfortunately I can't sleep at the moment. But here are the block pallets for this area that we're going to try and work with. Obviously, the stone stuff is mostly for this waterfall area. I'm going to kind of cut the flow of water back a bit, so it's not this huge tidal wave of water coming down, because that just looks a little bit silly. And I'm going to try and refine the area a bit, make it look a little more worn and interesting. So that's what these block types are for. And these block types here are going to be for the bottom of our pond. Now, I'm going to get rid of the sand and the clay, because that just feels a little bit messy to me. And instead, I'm going to replace it with this stuff. Now, despite the fact, hey, no. Not going to use grass for that. Now, oh, geez. Ender pearl? Okay. So, despite the fact that we have 5 different blocks going into this, the end result should actually be pretty clean. What I intend to do is kind of fade the blocks in the deeper it goes, and try and go for darker and darker shades as we go down. So, I don't really know how that's going to turn out. I've never really tried this before, but hopefully the end result is kind of cool looking. So, let's get to that and see how it ends up. So, I left off last clip saying that I was going to make a bit of a gradient and get darker colors towards the center of our pond. And I did try and do that. In fact, I tried to time-lapse the entire process as well, but it did not quite turn out the way I thought it would. In my head, it was going to look like the middle of the pond was just a little more murky and kind of, had more sediment in it or something, so it was a little darker. But instead, the middle of the pond just ended up like pitch black. Because it was a little bit deeper and there was dark colors down below, it felt like the pond was falling into an abyss or something. So that was no good. And then I proceeded to try out all kinds of different pond floor designs, and none of them really felt great to me. But I think that this is pretty much the best option we have, at least for the kind of dirty, muddy pond floor look. So it's basically just farmland and kind of soul sand around it, weaving around and stuff like that. Gives us kind of a blotchy, muddy look, which I think is okay. I also tried to add in some leaves coming off the edges, kind of like algae or plant life of some kind, just because it gives it a little more texture and makes it feel a little more alive. It's not perfect, but I think that's about the best we can do as far as plant life is concerned. What I would really like to be able to do is have some plants actually growing off the pond floor, but we don't really have any good options for that. You can put sugarcane and leaves and stuff down on the floor, but when you do that, it doesn't really look very good. In fact, do I have... Yes. Let's grab a leaf out quick and I'll show you what I mean. So, when you place leaves or pretty much any transparent block, you get this kind of ugly water-flowing texture. And as you may recall, this actually used to happen with glass as well, and they fixed it. So maybe someday we'll get that same treatment for leaves, and we'll be able to actually have at least some degree of plant life in our underwater areas. I think that would be quite nice. But hopefully that happens eventually. For right now, this is probably how it's going to stay, at least for the pond floor. The pond area itself is likely going to be changed a little bit yet as we start doing the rest of our landscaping, and we start doing things like reshaping all of these cliffs and reworking hills and stuff like that. The shape in general is just going to change a bit. So over here is our waterfall. That's also been reworked, and I think that looks roughly 4.5 million times better than it did before. Rather than just being a big, giant cascade of water, it's now a little bit more natural looking. Though the pond above, if we can get up there, is a little bit... Slow down. It's a little bit small for having a waterfall coming off of it. So maybe we'll expand that, because we do have more room up here on this hill, so we could expand that a little bit to look a little more logical for having a big old waterfall coming out of it. But that is in the future. We'll rework this area. There's a few other little additions I want to make as well, but for right now, I think it's good. Unfortunately, for right now, I also think we need to end the episode. I know I said I was going to do the beach today, and I really, really wanted to. In fact, I wanted to end on this so badly, and I was actually rushing throughout most of today's video so I could make time to do that. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out. We're over 20 minutes at this point, and I also am already a day late on uploading the video. So apologies for that. I am horrible at managing my time, and this week was a little rough. But hopefully that means that episode 9 will have a lot of interesting stuff in it, because 1, I want to take care of our beach project, which is going to have some kind of cool landscaping features to it, I think. So hopefully that's kind of nice. And I'd also like to start working on some other large-scale landscaping stuff on our island. Most notably, I want to start working out some of the cliffs and how those are going to look. And I think we might do that down here in this valley area. This is probably the most kind of cliffy area of the island, so I think this might be a good place to try and get our look sorted out. And if we make these look much more like steep cliff sides rather than weird hills covered in dirt and stone, then I think it'll look really, really cool down here. I'd also like to start doing more projects like taking care of this. We have this weird floating islands type thing that's connected just by a couple pieces of dirt, which is a little weird. And I think it might look a lot cooler if we build it up a little bit and then connect it to both sides of this valley. So it's kind of a natural arch and a natural land bridge. I think that might look nice. And there's a few other big projects like that I want to take care of as well. So hopefully we can start doing stuff like that in the next episode, and hopefully I don't run out of time and get late and all kinds of stuff like I did today. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode, even if it was a little bit rushed. And hopefully you guys have some cool ideas for stuff we can do on the surface of the island as well. I am going to be putting stuff that's not natural on the island, on the surface I mean. I know some of you have commented about that, how there's nothing really up here. And I agree, I do have ideas for some kind of man-made builds that we're going to do, though they are going to be fairly subtle for the most part. And if you have ideas for that stuff too, as always, be sure to tell me. But for today, I think that's going to call it done. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with my poor time management, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.